I was just a housekeeper. Invisible. Background noise to someone else's life. I cleaned, I dusted, I scrubbed floors no one noticed. And I never thought anyone would notice me either, until the Coles. They lived in a glass house, metaphorically and literally. A modern structure with perfect symmetry, tall ceilings, and too many empty corners. Claire Cole hired me on a Tuesday. She didn't shake my hand. Just walked me through the house like I was a vacuum she was programming. Clean the marble with the special spray. Don't touch the piano. That was it. Ethan Cole didn't say much the first few days. Just nodded when we passed in the hallway. Always dressed in grey or black, always with a coffee in hand. Tall, serious, tired. He worked from home, but never came out of his study unless he had to. I'd catch glimpses, blueprints spread out on the table, the faint click of his pen, jazz humming from a speaker. Claire, on the other hand, was loud without trying. Her heels echoed before she even entered a room. She'd breeze in from her boutique, talking on her Bluetooth earpiece, throwing her bag on the couch like she didn't have a husband working 2 doors down. She had presence, and yet somehow, the house still felt empty. I started noticing the gaps early on. 2 coffee mugs in the kitchen, but only one used. Pillows on the guest bed wrinkled in the morning. One night, I stayed a bit later than usual. Claire was late, and Ethan looked like he hadn't eaten. I heated up the leftover soup and placed it on the counter without asking. He didn't look at me, just muttered, "Thanks." I didn't wait for more. Some mornings, I'd hear the muffled sound of arguments. Nothing explosive, just words sharpened by distance. "You're never here. You don't notice when I am. I work, Ethan. I can't be everything." And then silence. The kind that chokes the rest of the day. One Thursday, I was polishing the mirrors in the hallway when I caught Ethan standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't talking. Just listening. After a while, he hung up and just stood there. I kept wiping the glass, pretending I hadn't seen. I started bringing fresh flowers into the house. Little things. Rearranged picture frames. Wiped counters even when they were clean. I told myself it was pride in my work, but deep down I knew it was for him. For the man who said thank you without looking, but somehow still made me feel seen. Claire started noticing the little changes too. "Did you move this vase?" she asked one day, her tone casual, her eyes sharp. I nodded. She stared for a second too long, then walked away. Something told me she didn't miss much, she just chose what to ignore. At night, when I went back to my 1-bedroom apartment, I'd think about the Coles. About how a house that perfect could feel so cold. Lewis, my boyfriend, usually came home late, tired and quiet. We didn't talk much. He'd scroll on his phone while I folded laundry. We weren't unhappy, we just weren't anything. One evening, while scrubbing the stove, I found myself humming the same tune I'd heard from Ethan's office. I didn't even realize it until he walked in, holding an empty cup. He paused. "That song. My dad used to play it all the time." I froze. He smiled faintly and walked past. That was the first time he ever looked me in the eye. After that, things shifted. Not big things. Just glances held longer than necessary. A soft thank you when I adjusted the blinds to stop the glare on his laptop. The way he stood a little closer when he passed me in the kitchen. It wasn't a crush. It was something more dangerous, recognition. Like we both knew what it felt like to be invisible in our own lives. And that knowledge lingered in the air like dust no one ever claimed. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was projecting feelings onto a man who hadn't really done anything. But the human heart doesn't need permission to wander. It just needs a window. And Ethan was already standing at 1. Claire left for a 3-day trip to New York. Something about a supplier meeting. She barely said goodbye, just tossed her suitcase into the back of a black car and waved at Ethan like a colleague. When the house went quiet that evening, it felt different. Heavy, expectant. I stayed a bit longer than usual, reorganizing the pantry, wiping down already clean counters. I told myself I was being thorough, but the truth sat quietly in my chest. I didn't want to leave yet. Ethan came out of his study around 8. He looked tired, his shirt slightly wrinkled, sleeves rolled up. "You haven't gone yet?" he asked, surprised but not annoyed. "I was finishing up the kitchen," I said, avoiding his eyes. "You eat yet?" I shook my head. He opened the fridge, pulled out leftovers I'd made earlier in the week. "You cooked this?" I nodded. "Smells better than anything I've had all week." He heated it up, then poured 2 glasses of wine without asking. We ate in silence, sitting on opposite ends of the kitchen island. It felt like something we weren't supposed to be doing, even though we hadn't crossed a line yet. After dinner, I gathered the dishes quickly, but he stopped me. "You don't have to rush." There was a calm in his voice I hadn't heard before. He leaned back in his chair, sipped his wine, and said, "You always notice the little things." I didn't answer. He kept speaking. "Claire used to be like that. She cared about details. She cared about me. Or she made it look that way." He laughed softly, a bitter edge to it. "Now it's like I live with a stranger." His honesty caught me off guard. I wasn't used to employers sharing their marriage problems. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. "You ever feel like you're next to someone, but they're 1,000 miles away?" he asked. "All the time," I said. And that was the most honest thing I'd said in weeks. We kept talking. About music. About books. About how he dreamed of being a painter but followed architecture instead. I told him about interior design school and how I had to drop out to support my mom. We weren't flirting, not exactly. We were revealing things to each other that didn't need to be said, but somehow needed to be heard. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You see people. Really see them." I felt something tighten in my chest. It was late. I stood to leave, and he followed me to the door. I reached for my coat, but paused when I felt his presence close behind me. "I should go," I whispered. "Then why haven't you?" he asked. I turned. There was no distance left between us. His hand touched mine, gentle, uncertain. I should have pulled away. I didn't. The kiss was quiet. No rush, no hunger, just acknowledgement. Of loneliness. Of 2 people who hadn't been touched in the right way in far too long. His hands rested on my waist, hesitant at first, then certain. I let go. It wasn't passion that followed. It was something heavier. A release. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced the curve of my back, and mine curled into the fabric of his shirt like I was holding onto a decision I couldn't take back. There were no promises, no names whispered in the dark. Just the creak of the floorboards, the soft breaths between silences, and the knowing that this wasn't just physical. I left before dawn. Slipped out quietly, keys in hand, shoes in the other. The morning air bit at my skin, but I didn't feel it. My thoughts were louder. I told myself it was a mistake. That I wouldn't let it happen again. But even as I walked home, I knew that something had shifted. Not just between Ethan and me, but in me. Back at my apartment, Lewis was still asleep. I watched him for a moment, his mouth slightly open, one arm draped over the side of the bed. He looked peaceful, the way people do when they've stopped noticing what they've already lost. I lay beside him, fully dressed, my heart still racing. Ethan wasn't mine. I had no right to feel anything beyond guilt. But somewhere, deep under the shame, I felt something else, seen, and once you've been seen, it's impossible to go back to being invisible. We didn't speak about it. Not a word. The next day, Ethan stayed in his office the entire time I was there. The door was closed, locked maybe. I moved through the house like a stranger in someone else's story. Every surface I touched felt like it remembered. I avoided the study. Claire came back that evening. Her voice filled the house before she did. She complained about traffic, about a delayed shipment, about how New York had lost its charm. Ethan barely looked up when she walked past him. She noticed. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. Something unspoken passed between them. I stopped staying late. I finished my work quickly, avoided lingering glances. Ethan didn't say thank you anymore. Just nodded if we crossed paths. I wondered if he regretted it, or if pretending it never happened was easier. I did the same, but the silence started to feel louder. 2 weeks later, Claire asked me to dust the study, something she usually left untouched. I knew what she was doing. I found my scarf tucked behind one of the chairs. The same scarf I wore the night it happened. My heart stopped for a second. I picked it up, folded it, slipped it into my pocket. Nothing was said, but everything changed. That evening, she waited for Ethan at the dinner table. I heard them from the hallway. "How long has this been going on?" His voice was low, It was one night. She laughed. Not the kind that says she found it funny. The kind that said she'd known all along. She cleans our floors. And you couldn't even keep your vows out of the dust. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I walked out, left my apron on the hook. I knew I wouldn't be coming back. I didn't get fired. I quit. Ethan never called. Never texted. I never expected him to. We both crossed a line that didn't have a return route. And neither of us had the courage to draw a new one. At home, Lewis noticed the shift. I was distant. Quiet. He asked if I was tired. I said yes. He nodded and went back to scrolling. We were back to existing beside each other. I kept waiting for him to ask more. He never did. One afternoon, I opened my laptop and searched for design schools. I filled out an application without telling anyone. I used money I'd been saving for nothing in particular. That night, I didn't sleep. My head was loud with what ifs. But I hit submit anyway. Months passed. I started taking night classes. I left cleaning behind and picked up freelance gigs, nothing big, but enough. I was building something again. Not for someone else. For me. Almost a year later, I was hired to redesign the interior of a small cafe downtown. It was a quiet job. Cozy space. Wood accents. Warm lights. I poured everything into it. On opening day, I came in early to walk through the finished space one last time before the owners arrived. I didn't expect to see his name on the permit board by the door, Cole and Lang Architecture. My stomach turned. He walked in 20 minutes later. Alone. No clipboard, no assistant. He looked older. Not tired. Just quieter. He saw me. I saw him. No words. No apology. Just a moment where two people stood in the same place with an ocean of time between them. He smiled, just barely. I didn't smile back. I didn't need to. When he left, I sat down at one of the tables I helped design and watched the light hit the surface just right. For once, it felt like mine. I never told Lewis. I didn't see the point. Whatever we had faded long before Ethan. What happened that night just forced me to admit it. Eventually, we ended things. No shouting. Just an understanding. Sometimes I still think about Ethan. Not with longing. Just curiosity. If he stayed. If Claire forgave him. If he ever thought about that night the way I did, not as a mistake, but as a turning point, because that's what it was. Not a love story. Not even really a betrayal. It was a pause. A breath. A reminder that I had needs, that I mattered, that I didn't have to stay in the background of other people's lives. I was just a housekeeper. Until that night. I used to believe that people like me didn't get second chances. That the roles we were handed, quiet, reliable, unnoticed, were permanent. But life has a way of challenging that belief when you're no longer afraid to be seen. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Lewis. It wasn't dramatic. We divided things calmly, like two people separating puzzle pieces that no longer fit together. He asked once, "Is there someone else?" I said, "No. Just me." That was the truth. Whatever happened with Ethan, it ended the second I left that house. What stayed with me wasn't him. It was the version of myself I glimpsed when I dared to feel something real. Classes kept me busy. I poured everything into design, textures, colors, space. I found freedom in creating rooms where people could breathe, where emotion could live in soft corners and intentional lighting. I didn't need validation. For the first time in years, I was doing something because it made me feel alive, not because someone expected it. Clients came slowly, then steadily. Word spread. A local boutique hired me to redo their storefront. Then a small hotel. I worked long hours, often alone, but it never felt empty. I started choosing furniture the way I once chose silence, with care. Only this time, I was building something for the future, not hiding from the present. Sometimes, late at night, I'd remember the Coles house. The echo of Claire's heels, the soft rhythm of Ethan's jazz, the way the air shifted after that night. But the memory didn't sting. It didn't warm me either. It just was, a truth I no longer needed to rewrite. One evening, while reviewing sketches at a downtown cafe, I overheard two women talking at the next table. Claire's name came up. She's running her business solo now. apparently split from her husband. Boutique's doing better than ever. I didn't flinch. I just stirred my tea and moved on. Some endings don't need your attention to be final. I thought about reaching out to Ethan once. I even drafted a message. Not to rekindle anything, just to say thank you. For seeing me, even if it was brief. For being the mirror I didn't know I needed. But I never sent it. Some moments lose power when you try to explain them. Instead, I focused on my next step. I found a small office space, sunlight poured through wide windows, and the rent was low enough to manage. I painted the walls myself, hung my own designs, and printed business cards with my name on them. Just my name. No title. No label. I didn't need one. A few weeks into the new space, I got a call from a client I hadn't heard from in months. He'd referred me to someone looking to revamp their lakeside property. I met them on a Saturday, walked the space, asked questions, took notes. It wasn't until I saw the portfolio on their table that I noticed it, Cole and Lang stamped in the corner of the floor plans, Ethan Cole's firm. I asked casually, the husband nodded. Yeah, he's brilliant. Retired early, though. Not sure why. His partner runs most of it now. I didn't ask more. It didn't matter. That night, I sat by the lake behind the project house and let the breeze pass over me. I thought about how different things looked when you stopped waiting for permission to change. How one decision, a single moment, could shatter the walls you built around yourself. People talk about infidelity like it's a sin, a scarlet letter. But it's not always about desire. Sometimes, it's a cry for oxygen when you've been drowning in silence. Sometimes, it's the moment you finally choose yourself, even if it's messy. Even if it hurts. I'm not proud of what I did. But I'm not ashamed either. It was a fragment of who I was. A moment where the lines blurred and the truth slipped through. I don't carry it like a weight anymore. I carry it like a map, one that led me here. Now, when I walk into rooms, I don't disappear. I don't shrink into corners or apologize for taking space. I own it. I design spaces that reflect that belief, for others and for myself. I stopped being the background to someone else's life. I started living my own. I was just a housekeeper, until that night, and I'll never be just anything again.